You think you can talk back to your manager? You're just a new hire. Know your place. The words dropped like a hammer, shattering the fragile rhythm of the morning meeting. For a second, it was as if the air itself paused. Every keystroke, every sip of coffee, every whisper in the fourth-floor conference room of Vantage Core Technologies was silenced. Not because the insult was shocking, it wasn't. It was standard fare. What was shocking was the response. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't defend himself with fiery rhetoric. He simply said what was true. And for that simple act, he was fired. No one stepped forward. No one asked questions. Silence, thick and weighty, filled the vacuum where courage should have lived. But what they didn't know, what not a single soul in that room had realized, was that the man they had just cast out wasn't a junior coder fresh out of onboarding. He was the CEO, disguised, watching, testing, learning what. This isn't just a story of a man losing a job. It's a reckoning, a quiet rebellion. It's about the moment when someone chooses to speak the truth, knowing the cost, and how that single act can unravel an entire system built on fear and compliance. Kevin Marshall's words had sliced through the meeting like jagged glass, aimed directly at the newcomer, Mike. The tension was immediate. Everyone felt it in their bones. Mike had only been on the team for a few weeks. He was quiet, meticulous, a recent transfer from some startup out west, or so they thought. He wasn't loud or ambitious, but there was something in the way he observed everything. Like someone who was there for more than just code reviews. Emily, the team's QA engineer, had just been torn apart in front of everyone, accused of botching a key bug fix that delayed a rollout. Her face was pale, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a stack of printed logs no one had asked for. Kevin had shut her down mid-sentence, mocked her, implied she couldn't handle the pressure. The room stayed silent, heads down, eyes averted. But then Mike stood up. "I reviewed those same logs last night," he said calmly. The failure wasn't on Emily's side. The configuration variable reset during batch deployment. It was an automation issue. A long silence followed. Kevin's jaw tightened. He chuckled, cold and dismissive. "You think you're qualified to speak in here?" he sneered. "You're here to observe and learn, not to interrupt." Mike didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He simply sat back down. But the message had landed. Like a pebble dropped into still water, the ripples were felt by everyone. Something had shifted. By lunchtime the next day, Mike's badge no longer worked. A sterile HR email cited a breach of team cohesion. No warning, no appeal, just an immediate escort out. His desk remained as he left it, a half-finished cup of coffee, a notebook filled with neat, methodical observations, a powered-on dev terminal that still showed an open debug window. Nobody protested. They were confused, uncertain. The man they barely knew was gone, and with him something else had vanished. A sense of moral clarity, perhaps. But Mike Barrett wasn't real. The name, the backstory, the quiet demeanor, all fabricated. A mask. Beneath it was Jackson Blake, the 47-year-old founder and CEO of Vantage Core, a man who had built the company from nothing but a garage and a second-hand laptop, a visionary who had grown disillusioned with glossy dashboards and sanitized reports. He went undercover not for a stunt, but for the truth. And now he had it. He had seen the rot beneath the polish, the apathy, the fear, the cost of silence, Emily's humiliation, the room's complicity, his own dismissal for speaking a truth that should have mattered. He hadn't planned to be fired, but maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what needed to happen, because now, change wouldn't come through memos or meetings. It would come from the top. Jackson Blake had never cared much for appearances, no designer suits, no flashy headlines. But what he did care about was culture, integrity, building something worth believing in. And now he knew exactly what had to be rebuilt. There was no marble office, no sleek corner suite with glass walls. In fact, if you walked through the open layout of Vantage Core Technologies' Manhattan headquarters, you'd be hard-pressed to even find where the CEO sat. That was intentional. For years, Jackson Blake had believed in staying close to the ground floor. That clarity was born from proximity. But somewhere along the company's meteoric rise from 50 to 500 employees, that nearness dissolved. Conversations became status updates. Honesty became bullet points on slide decks. And truth, whatever that looked like, started slipping silently through the cracks. At first, the signs were subtle. A grumbling complaint here, an unusually high turnover rate there, a concerning statistic buried in the HR culture survey that no one wanted to talk about. Anonymous whispers about managers weaponizing their authority, turning closed-door meetings into power plays. Jackson read the reports. He approved the diversity initiatives, but it all felt like theater. Performative solutions to problems no one wanted to name aloud. It wasn't real, not to him. So he did something no one expected. He disappeared. Not from the company, to the world. He was still very much the CEO, but inside those walls, Jackson Blake became a ghost. A myth, a name on a floor he no longer walked. Quietly, deliberately, he stepped down from visibility and stepped into anonymity, reborn as a junior QA engineer named Mike Barrett. The alias was airtight, a backstory rooted in plausibility. A laid-off engineer from a now-defunct West Coast startup called Byte Bay, recently acquired and conveniently lost in the bureaucratic shuffle. HR never blinked. The resume was modest, the LinkedIn profile was sparse, nothing flashy, just real enough to slide through unnoticed. Jackson changed more than his name. He darkened his hair, lost the tailored jackets in favor of zip-up hoodies, let his shoulders slump a little. Even his voice dropped an octave and lost its usual cadence. Mike Barrett wasn't just a disguise. He was a study in humility. The irony hit hard on day one. Sitting through onboarding, Jackson listened to a mid-level assistant read the very values he had once written. Now hollow, scripted, rehearsed. The culture he dreamed of sounded like a TED Talk no one believed. But he played along. He was assigned to the QA integration team, tucked away in a wing of the building that time had seemingly forgotten. The floors creaked. The lighting flickered. It was always too cold, yet the people, the real lifeblood of the company, were there. Overworked, underappreciated, quietly brilliant. They held Vantage Core together, one line of code at a time. Within days, Mike saw what no dashboard could tell him: developers skipping meals to meet impossible deadlines, a manager who confused cruelty with radical transparency, an office culture that taught survival through silence. And then there was Emily. She wasn't weak. She was deliberate, conscientious, maybe too vocal for her own good. Always the one to triple-check builds, to ask why instead of how fast. And for that, she was punished, blamed for delays she tried to prevent, assigned the grunt work others dodged. Her wins were erased, her voice diluted. Well, she did. Mike didn't rush in to rescue anyone. That wasn't the point. He observed, took notes. He stayed late, helped debug issues, rewrote broken test cases without taking credit. He volunteered for the late-night deployments so others could see their kids, breathe, sleep. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He just remembered what it was like to care. And then came the meeting, the insult, the moment where he chose to stop being quiet. He spoke the truth, calmly, clearly, and the company, as if waiting for a reason, shut the door on him. a quiet execution in the name of cohesion. But this wasn't the end. This was the ignition point. There was something about that corner of the fourth floor. The west wing. The desks wobbled. The ceiling buzzed. No one asked to work there. It was the forgotten trench of Vantage Core. 10 people, 3 contractors, 1 battlefield. All under the rule of Kevin Marshall. Kevin wasn't a screamer. That would be too easy to spot. He was polished, practiced. He'd built a miniature kingdom over 7 years. Quietly powerful, quietly cruel. And within that dominion, Emily was the thorn. She wasn't the youngest, not the newest, just the one bold enough to question things, to suggest better systems, to refuse shortcuts. She made things better, which meant she made things harder for Kevin. And Kevin didn't yell. He erased. He excluded. He weaponized meetings and masked control as mentorship. Mike watched, hoping at first that it was just a personality clash, a misunderstanding. But the pattern emerged, too coordinated to be accidental, too consistent to ignore. Meetings where her numbers were questioned, her ideas dismissed, her credit reassigned. Late nights unnoticed, wins buried. One Friday night, long after most had clocked out, Mike passed by the war room and saw Emily still hunched over stacks of regression logs. No words, just a glance. He sat beside her, opened his laptop, and started helping. But it became a quiet ritual, a silent alliance, not for glory, for dignity. And even under flickering lights and the cold hum of old vents, something began to stir. A shared truth, a quiet resistance, the beginning of something bigger than either of them knew. Under the flickering hum of fluorescent lights, something unexpected grew in the cold corners of the West Wing. Dignity. Between shared takeout containers and whispered jokes about legacy code, between cursed Jenkins pipelines and tangled Git histories, a fragile connection formed. Mike and Emily weren't allies by design. They were bonded by necessity, by the unspoken understanding that survival sometimes meant solidarity. But underneath every smile, every debugging session, every shared glance across their outdated workstations, Mike carried a weight that grew heavier by the day. Not frustration with Emily nor the team, but with himself. Because he had built this place, this company. His company was supposed to stand for something better. And somehow, in the race to scale and profits and quarterly KPIs, they'd left something sacred behind. People. It wasn't just Emily who bore the brunt. One afternoon, Mike watched as Logan, a green but eager developer fresh out of boot camp, froze in place after Kevin mocked him for asking a basic question. Another day, a quiet engineer named Dana submitted a brilliant process optimization idea, only to be told it didn't align with leadership style. Mike began keeping notes, nothing overt, just a private collection of behaviors, names, dates. A hidden journal documenting a culture slipping off its axis. He wasn't sure what he was building, a case, a reckoning, or simply a record, but he knew one thing for certain. He could no longer pretend. Silence was no longer neutrality, it was complicity, and fear, in a place meant to champion innovation, was poison. The breaking point came without warning. During the mid-sprint review, Emily flagged a discrepancy in the deployment logs, a configuration inconsistency that could spell major trouble down the line. Kevin, arms crossed and smug, waved it off. She insisted. He laughed. "If you spent half as much time doing the work as you do finding excuses," he said, loud enough for all to hear, "maybe this team wouldn't be behind." The room froze. Eyes dropped. No one moved. And then Mike stood up. It wasn't a speech, it wasn't even loud, but it was enough. It was enough to fracture the illusion, enough to cut through the pretense. Enough for Kevin's smile to harden, for him to memorize the name he had previously dismissed. That moment cost Mike everything, but to Jackson Blake, the real loss would have been staying silent. The email came just before lunch. No subject line, no greeting, just a cold sentence. Please report to HR immediately regarding an internal conduct matter. Mike read it once, then again, slower. He paused, fingers hovering above the keyboard, searching for some response that didn't exist. Then, quietly, he stood, slid his chair back, walked the hall. No one stopped him, but a few glanced up. They always knew. The HR office felt like another world. The third floor was pristine, soundless, soulless. Behind a pane of frosted glass sat a woman Mike had never seen before. Navy blazer, controlled smile, the kind of practiced empathy HR departments were trained to simulate. "Melissa," she said, HR business partner for Tech Ops. Her tone was cordial, but every syllable was razor sharp. She read a script, clinical, impersonal. There had been reports, concerns, behavioral disruptions, a misalignment with company culture. The phrasing was corporate poetry, vague enough to avoid liability, pointed enough to guarantee consequence. Mike didn't argue, not because he agreed, but because he understood. This was already over. This wasn't a conversation, it was a checklist. A quiet purge. They called it a mutual separation. 2 weeks' pay, no fuss, no escort. His badge was deactivated before he even left the room. The beauty of it, he thought, was how cleanly someone could be erased without anyone seeing the knife. Back at his desk, he sat one last time, stared at a monitor he'd never log into again. His coffee sat half full. A sticky note clung to the base of his screen. Emily's handwriting. "Thanks for staying late again. You're a lifesaver." He smiled, just for a moment. Across the room, Kevin gestured animatedly at the whiteboard, outlining sprint goals. His voice was lighter that day, triumphant. Mike didn't say goodbye. Not to Kevin, not even to Emily. He just left. But the silence he left behind screamed louder than any parting words could have. Upstairs, Kevin crafted the narrative quickly. Mike wasn't a good cultural fit. Brilliant guy, but not adaptable. Too reactive under pressure. The language of sanitized dismissal. And no one questioned it. Because no one wanted to be next. That afternoon, Emily stared at her screen. Mike's name no longer appeared on the build list. She didn't need an announcement. She knew. Logan kept glancing at the door, hoping for a sign that wouldn't come. Dana stopped suggesting process improvements. She muted her mic, turned off her camera. The culture hadn't crashed. It had calcified. But Kevin moved on like nothing had happened. His voice filled meeting rooms, echoing phrases like, "We're finally back on track." But something had shifted, something irreversible. And outside, walking into the icy bite of New York wind on 8th Avenue, Jackson Blake no longer felt like a man fired. He felt like a man who had finally seen clearly. And clarity, painful as it was, would change everything. But his eyes, they had changed. No longer just observing, they were assessing, dissecting, remembering. And with each passing day, fewer people dared forget the unspoken rules. They had seen what happened to someone who dared to care. Emily felt it the most. She never spoke of it directly, but the memory lived behind her eyes. The meeting played over in her mind like a reel stuck on repeat. Mike, calm, precise, respectfully standing up for the truth. He hadn't been rebellious. He had been right. And yet, he was gone. Just like that. She thought about reaching out, drafted messages she never sent, HR requests she never submitted, because deep down she knew if someone like Mike, decent, measured, quietly selfless, could be erased that easily, what chance did she have? Across the city, Jackson Blake sat at his kitchen table. The hoodie was gone. The name Mike Barrett had been retired. Just Jackson now. Raw, exposed, and angry. A legal pad lay in front of him, filled with scribbled notes, dates, names. Every scrawled sentence was a piece of truth he could no longer ignore. He had once dreamed VantageCore would be more than just a tech firm. He wanted it to be a movement, a beacon of thoughtful innovation. But what he saw now was process without purpose, culture replaced by control. People, the very soul of the company, had become expendable. He flipped through the pages, little moments that had once seemed small. Kevin scoffing at a request for mentorship, a junior dev apologizing for being sick, a manager mocking the suggestion that anonymous feedback could be taken seriously. The problem wasn't just one man. It was a system built to reward silence, a machine that only cared about metrics, not meaning. It wasn't just broken. It was betraying everything he had built it to stand for. He thought of Emily again. The quiet resilience in her, the strength it took just to keep showing up. What must she think of him now? Just another bystander who came, made noise, and disappeared. But this story wasn't over. Not yet. Kevin thought it was done, that he'd buried the threat, that silence had won. But Jackson Blake had the final chapter. Not as Mike, not as a ghost, as the founder, as the man who still held the power to change everything. The meeting invite hit Kevin Marshall's calendar late Thursday. No subject, just a room number, 17B executive floor. He almost ignored it, until he saw the sender. J. Blake. Kevin stared at the name, heart hitching. There had only ever been one J. Blake at VantageCore. The next morning, he adjusted his tie twice, rechecked his talking points, though he had no idea what he was walking into. At the 17th floor, the receptionist waved him through without a word. That's when he knew. Inside the conference room, the blinds were down. The air felt heavier still, and at the head of the table sat a man Kevin hadn't seen in over a year. Jackson Blake. He didn't look like his photos. No studio lights, no professional composure, just sharp, clear eyes and hands folded with purpose. Pen? Kevin paused at the door. Sit, Jackson said. He did. No greetings, no handshakes, just silence. Then Jackson reached into a worn leather folder and slid a paper across the table. It was a Slack printout. Kevin scanned it, highlighted lines in his own words. That kid thinks he's a hero. All he did was embarrass me. HR's got it handled. No way he lasts another week. And another. He was poking his nose where it didn't belong. Culture fit excuse always works. Kevin's lips parted, a protest forming. Jackson didn't blink. I thought I built a place where people could speak freely, he said, voice even. Instead, I find you weaponizing silence. Mr. Blake, Kevin started. Stop. It wasn't loud, but it cut like steel. You don't get to explain, because I was there. I watched. I sat in your meetings. I heard how you spoke to people. I saw you erase their voices, their effort, their worth. Kevin went still, color draining from his face. Mike Barrett, Jackson said slowly, wasn't some transfer from the West Coast. He was me. Kevin froze, mouth dry. Nothing came out. Jackson leaned in. I built this company, and I expected flaws, but not cruelty, not cowardice, not a system that punishes honesty and rewards control. And you let it thrive. Kevin tried to respond, but Jackson didn't let him. You didn't know. No. You didn't care. Not until it threatened you. He stood, closed the folder. You're being reassigned, effective immediately, compliance restructuring, Boston. No direct reports, no leadership duties, mandatory ethics remediation. Kevin didn't speak. He just sat, slack-jawed, the weight of consequence settling in. Jackson turned to the window, breath steady. The city buzzed below, but up here, something had shifted. Not vengeance. Justice. And it was only the beginning. Kevin didn't respond. He just sat there, small, diminished, no longer the force he once imagined himself to be, a man who had mistaken fear for respect and authority for leadership. This conversation doesn't leave this room, Jackson said firmly, his voice calm but carrying unmistakable finality. Because I'm not interested in spectacle. I'm interested in fixing what I broke. He paused, eyes sharp. But if I ever hear about you silencing someone again, I won't send a calendar invite. He left before Kevin could even process what had just happened. The door clicked shut, and with it, a shift occurred. Not vengeance, not closure. Just movement. A quiet turning of the tide. The annual town hall was never meant to stir emotion. It was a corporate staple, a rehearsed hour of projections, plans, maybe a stock options announcement to keep spirits high. But this year was different. From the moment employees entered the main auditorium at Vantage Corps' Manhattan headquarters, something hung in the air. An electricity that only comes when silence has lingered too long. On stage there was no backdrop, no branding, just a single mic under a lone spotlight. And then Jackson Blake stepped into the light. He wasn't dressed for optics, no tailored suit, no polished delivery, just a simple navy shirt, the same one he wore as Mike Barrett. The room held its breath. I want to tell you a story. He began, his voice unwavering, about someone who joined this company recently. His name was Mike. He was quiet, showed up early, stayed late, didn't say much, but he saw everything. Chairs creaked, people leaned forward, some glanced at each other knowingly. Mike worked on the integration team. He watched a teammate get blamed for mistakes she didn't make, saw talented people ignored, saw silence become safety and truth become risk. And one day, Mike spoke up. He paused, and he was fired for it. The silence in the room became something sacred. Some of you knew him. Some of you worked beside him. Some of you helped push him out. And some of you said nothing. Not because you agreed, but because you were scared. Another breath. That was Mike. It wasn't dramatics. It was a revelation. Gasps echoed. A hand flew to a mouth. Whispers shot down aisles. Disbelief collided with recognition. I didn't go undercover to test you. I did it because I needed to see Vantage Corps through your eyes, and what I saw broke me. Because companies don't fail because of products. They fail when people stop protecting each other. And when you stop protecting each other, behind him, the screen lit up. No KPIs, no revenue charts, just 3 words. Courage to speak. This isn't a campaign, Jackson said. It's a commitment. Starting today, we're creating protected channels for every voice to report retaliation or abuse. No fear, no filter. We're launching a mentorship program led by people who know what silence costs. And leadership will now be measured not by output, but by the cultures they cultivate. Applause came slowly at first, unsure. Then it surged, rising like a wave, until the entire auditorium was on its feet. But Jackson wasn't finished. He turned toward the front row. Emily Torres, would you join me? Emily stood, stunned. Slowly she climbed to the stage. "You showed integrity when it cost you," Jackson said, "and we're better because of it." He handed her a simple card. No title, just a role. Culture lead. QA Integration Rebuild Initiative. "I would be honored if you helped us rebuild what we lost." Emily didn't cry. She didn't need to. She nodded once, strong and steady. The room erupted again, this time louder. Not for performance, but because hope had returned. In the weeks that followed, Vantage Core didn't just change, it transformed. Voices once quiet found space. Juniors asked questions without fear. Leaders made room for vulnerability. Feedback became real, human. Emily stepped into her new role not for revenge, but for purpose. She worked with HR to dismantle broken systems, sat in on interviews, rebuilt processes with empathy at their core. She didn't raise her voice often. She didn't need to. People followed her because she had earned something far rarer than authority: trust. Kevin Marshall, meanwhile, became a name on a relocation memo. No clout, no audience, just another face in the compliance department in Boston. He said the right things in ethics training, but now, stripped of power, perhaps he finally understood what it meant to listen. Vantage Core still looked the same on the outside, same brick walls, same scuffed carpets, but inside something fundamental had shifted. And Jackson Blake, he never reclaimed his old office. He didn't need to. He walked the floors now, ate in the lunchroom, answered direct messages. Sometimes he just listened. Because he had learned something that no strategy retreat or shareholder report could ever teach. People don't leave companies because of the work. They leave because they feel invisible, ignored, unprotected. He thought often about the day they fired him, not because it wounded his pride, but because it revealed a truth hidden behind spreadsheets and dashboards, that somewhere along the way, people had learned that doing the right thing might cost them everything. And that kind of truth demands change. He remembered what he told Emily before handing her that card. "You're not here to fix what broke. You're here to help us build it right this time." And she had, quietly, powerfully. Jackson never gave the board the full story. He didn't need to. The numbers showed results. But the real story belonged to those who lived it, who rebuilt it, who now thrived inside it. One day, he passed by the integration team's wing and paused outside a room filled with laughter. Not nervous, not forced, just real. He smiled. Some victories don't need headlines. Some revolutions begin with whispers. And sometimes leadership means making sure no one ever gets left behind again. Jackson Blake had been fired for standing up. But in losing that title, he rediscovered what leadership truly means. Ensuring every voice matters. Every single one.